Good afternoon and welcome to our IGF-USA plenary session on Connecting the Next Billion. At the onset, I want to thank a few folks, the organizers, Marilyn, Cade, Garland, McCoy, and Judith Hellerstein, for organizing both this session and for chairing these last few days a very diverse IGF-USA multi-stakeholder working group that, as the Undersecretary mentioned, is discussing and formulating possible high-level policy options on connectivity for the global IGF. We have a very strong panel today for this discussion. Let me just begin with the gentleman on my right, Kevin Martin, our former FCC chairman now at Facebook. To his right, Sonia, Jorge, the executive director of the Alliance for Affordable Internet, a former U.S. government colleague of mine, Jane Coffin, once at NTIA and now at ISOC, and another former USG colleague, Will Hudson, who is now at Google, and to his right, Christopher Burns from USAID on the digital development team, who's doing a lot of the work that the Undersecretary described in her remarks. And finally, very excited that we were able to have Madura from Comcast join us to talk a lot about their work with digital literacy that's been taking place. To set the scene a bit for our panel, I wanted to start with a picture of two worlds, a connected world and an unconnected world. Originally, we had envisioned that this panel would take place in a different auditorium, and we'd have like the visual slides for you all. But essentially, with this picture, I think this will still work. In the connected world, we have 3.16 billion users, 800 million tweets a day, 127 billion emails a day, 20 billion photos on Instagram, 300 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute, 1.43 billion Facebook users. As the Undersecretary noted, in this world, all of this exciting connectivity is spurring unprecedented access to education, medicine, information, and global markets. Then we have an unconnected world. Some statistics show that, unbelievably, almost 60% of the world is without access to the internet. If you look at some of maps that showcase this divide, it's quite stark, the picture that you have between where you see connectivity and where you don't. And some statistics show, and ITU-based statistics particularly show, that developed countries tend to have a 77% adoption rate, and developing countries are lagging far behind at 31%. And that actually, when you look at these statistics, there hasn't been much of a close in the digital divide over time, which I think is most distressing. To help us make sense of all this, I now turn to our panelists for their impressions and also for information on how their company or their organization is working to help both the unconnected that we've talked about, but also maybe the underconnected, those that may be using the internet only once a week, once a month, but that we could really see much higher internet user rates. And so let me just turn immediately to my right, Kevin. Facebook leadership has done a terrific job of bringing attention to this issue, and we're very grateful for that. Maybe you could give us a sense of kind of the current activities that are underway at Facebook.
So Facebook, mission is to try to connect the world and to share more information more easily. And so they think that solving this digital, divide problem is critical from a policy perspective and it's for all of our use. And so they think that there's three really root causes to it, right? There's some folks that have lack of infrastructure, but there's a significant number of people that cost is a barrier, and then there's also a significant number of people that that don't appreciate the underlying value and the proposition that the internet can provide. And so that's some combination of the cost that this provided and not enough localized services that would draw their attention. And Facebook has made this part of its mission is try to solve this, and so they're going to have a multifaceted approach to try to address all three of those. And so they do have, through their connectivity labs, a variety of projects that are trying to look at ways in which they can use technological advances to connect people that have no infrastructure access today. And they were alluded to in the last panel in terms of UAVs and drones and as ways to extend access. And they've got some smaller projects where they're trying to develop the opportunity to have access in in Heliopolis is a poor suburb of Brazil, for example, where they're going to be providing internet access with traditional wireless technologies to try to address some of the cost issues and see what the results are there. And then they've been very active in developing partnerships with carriers to try to address the value prong, as we just were talking about, in which they provide a suite of basic services that address many of the areas that were talked about in the previous speakers in Ms. Novelli's speech about health and educational information, access to basic e-commerce, basic communications functionality. And so they've developed an internet.org platform that's open to anyone who can meet the technical criteria to be able to provide those slimmed down services. So to provide people with an opportunity to get an introduction to what some of those online basic services are, as a way of trying to migrate people onto the full internet usage after that. And so they've tried to try to find ways to address all three prongs of this problem.
Thank you. And Sonia, the Undersecretary mentioned the 2014 report of the Alliance for Affordable Internet. It would be great to get your take on, what you think we should be doing more of.
So for those of you who don't know the Alliance, we are a global coalition of public, private, civil society organizations that have come together to really work on reforming policy and regulatory frameworks in developing countries so that we have the kinds of conditions that the Undersecretary mentioned that will allow for affordable access and affordable adoption and use of the internet to be a reality in developing countries. And so because we focus very much on policy and regulation as one of the critical areas that we see needs to be worked on to facilitate things like the technology that Gavin was just mentioning, that Facebook and many other technology companies that work with us are developing, is very important that not only those technologies are made possible, and a lot of innovation is made possible in developing countries, but we definitely want to ensure that the kind of investment, for example, that is taking place in developing countries is one that is optimized, is one that is not just focusing on expanding infrastructure for the sake of expanding infrastructure, but to think about expanding infrastructure in such a way that the 80% of Nigerians that live under the poverty line actually will be able to afford the kinds of internet the services that can be made available to them if that infrastructure was there to provide those services. So we work on really pushing for policy and regulatory reform that not only focuses on definitely investing in infrastructure and expanding, and as it was highlighted earlier, but in new ways, in ways that are focusing on reducing the overall costs. We also work on areas such as spectrum policy, so that in many countries where spectrum has been very limited, especially for broadband, that not only becomes more available, but most importantly, again, because we focus on affordability and the cost equation, that is available and much reduced prices. And so that countries don't think that spectrum is yet another way to simply increase the amount of resources in a country's coffers, but it's really a way of defining public policy to bring about the kind of access and the kind of use that we would like to see their citizens have benefit from and have access to. So when we think about a spectrum, we very much work with governments and other stakeholders in countries so that, for example, unlicensed spectrum can be utilized, so that other forms of spectrum licenses can be experimented with, so that many new entrepreneurs can have the ability to bring about new options of access, especially to rural areas where many of those that live under the poverty are located. So we really look at a spectrum of issues. Those are just two examples. But the key point that I would like to make, and also to link to what Manu started the panel with, these really incredible statistics on what we see the internet and the online world to be today. The reality for us at A4AI is that we're trying to make change and to impact change that will bring about the many billion that are not online yet. This is a very interesting, exciting world where the majority of the people of the world, 2/3 of the world's population, cannot benefit from. And that's what we're trying to have an impact on and change through policy and regulatory reform.
Jane, you've done an incredible amount of work at ISOC on this issue, and it would be great to get your take on everything.
And thank you very much for having us here today. We really are a keen supporter of local, regional, and the mother IGF, if we can call it that. I'm going to speak about some very practical projects that we've been working on. One is in Bolivia, landlocked country, one of the two in South America. Colleagues of mine who are from our regional bureau, working with other partners like Packet Clearinghouse, Cisco, the government of Bolivia, and local internet service providers, come together in what we call a sustainable layered approach, engagement after engagement after engagement, where we've had to come in and do things like tell them that Raspberry Pis are not spy devices, where we're trying to measure the network. We're trying to take a glimpse of what's happening in Bolivia, help build an internet exchange point, working with the government to understand why a neutral bottom-up IXP, local governance, is important for cheaper, better, faster traffic, and also for local traffic exchange versus just over a border where long-haul traffic costs are much more expensive. The second project that we'll talk about is the Wireless for Communities project. It's a project that we've been working on in rural Indian villages, high mountain villages. There's one specific example that I'll highlight in a region called Talonia. It's called the Barefoot University, connecting two campuses, over 500 people, 250 villages, everything from cyber cafes, women empowerment issues, and rural electrification projects for solar. So I know this is a favorite topic of Garland's. I wanted to bring it up today. But this is something where we're looking at small, scalable projects. We do hope to take these to a much higher level in other parts of the world. But what we're talking about are areas where we have seen progress. We know where small projects are working, and we're training local people to train each other. This is another key aspect where that sustainability is critical. The other project that I'll mention is something very important and dear to us on peering and interconnection. We helped create something called the African Peering and Interconnection Forum, and if my colleague Karen Rose is in the room, a huge shout out to Karen and our local African team. This was something we started about 7 to 8 years ago. First, just bringing people together to see where the technical experts, where they were in the country, how many existed, did they have local internet exchange points or not, and how we could help them. And I will note that we just don't jump in and say, we're here to help. We work with local people to see whether or not they want us to come in and do what we do, which is try and train them more. So the African Peering and Interconnection Forum is an event that's held every year. We bring fellows, we provide fellowships and bring people from over 21 internet exchange points in rural, remote parts and urban parts of Africa to help provide connectivity. This is bottom-up technical expertise, people who are learning together. We help provide funding for that event, but we bring them together to try and create more connectivity. Over time, some of the experts that we've been working with have learned how to scale up their networks. I know this may sound like a small change on the megabit to gigabit side, but we're looking at things like 80 megabits in one internet exchange point in Malawi going up to 800. What does that mean? It means that they're attracting local content delivery networks, they're attracting international content delivery networks. It means there are more people who have access, and we have found that there's a lot of latent demand. So there's a lot of great work that's going on, small projects, which can be scaled up. So we try to come in at a sustainable, local, regional level and do what we can to bring that to other regions where they would like us to come and do the work we do.
So, Will, it's always great when we see a company take innovative approaches to really extend the benefits of connectivity. And you may have two examples, both with Project Link and Project Loon, but we really look forward to kind of your views on what Google is doing.
This is heavier than I thought it would be. So again, thanks for having us, and thanks you all for sitting here on a Thursday afternoon when it's beautiful outside to talk about this really important topic. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what Google's doing, but then sort of pivot from that a little bit. You know, most people here know that Google's mission from the beginning, you know, that sort of refrain of making the world's information universally accessible and useful. in order to do that, right, and we do it in a variety of ways through products like search or maps or whatever, and other companies are engaged in similar endeavors with their own products, the users have to actually have access to that data, right? And it needs to be the right data. It needs to be useful. It needs to be relevant to them where they are. And so, Google's done a lot of work in this space, but we're far from the only ones, as you've heard already, and we'll hear as we go down the line. And I think the watchword for us has always been sort of the importance of being innovative and being flexible in your approach, sort of understanding what the local users and community needs, and then figuring out a way to get that to them. So as Manu mentioned, with Project Link, was an endeavor we started a couple of years ago in Kampala, where we looked at sort of several layers of the access stack there. And on the one hand, there's been tremendous growth in undersea cables connecting many parts of the African continent. And in Kampala, there's been a lot of work sort of building out mobile networks in the cities. But what hadn't happened was sort of a major urban broadband network that would allow those two things to talk to one another. So in other words, you had fast connection coming into the shore, the capability for a fast connection in the city, but nothing to connect the two to let users really use the internet as it was meant to be. And so Link is essentially a project. It's a urban fiber network in Kampala that, importantly, it isn't for Google to use, right? We're not an ISP there. We're not providing connectivity there. What we are doing, our end users, what we are doing is providing shared infrastructure so that ISPs and mobile providers in that community can use that network to provide their own services. And what I think, to go from that, I think what I would just underscore, and then I'll let other people talk because they'll be more interesting, is sort of, an approach like that worked there. There might be different problems in a different environment, and that's why when you see the work that Google is doing, there's stuff like Link, as Manu mentioned. There's Project Loon, which is essentially trying to provide internet access through balloons flying through the air, which the engineering aspects of that are far beyond me. But what I will say is it underscores this need to think outside the box, try and meet users where they are, and deal with the geography that you have, rather than getting too wrapped up around delivering the internet in a certain way. And then at the back end, of course, is the sort of, once people have the internet, what do they do with it? And is it something that changes their lives like it's changed all of ours? That's why we're all here, right? And for that, you need locally relevant content. You need people that understand the internet, understand how to take, how to use it, how to interact with it. That's what I know we'll hear from later in terms of digital literacy products. But I think that it's important that we not lose sight of the fact that this isn't just about access or sort of connecting people. It's also about making sure that they understand and have an appreciation and the skills to do something innovative with it themselves, right? There was all this innovation to get it there. Let's let them continue to innovate once they have it. And I think that's really what we need to be focused on, the sort of life cycle of bridging this gap.
So as at the department, as we have been thinking about our connectivity initiative, we've been in very close partnership and alignment with our friends at Aid. And it's great to have Chris Burns here with the digital development team, and really look forward to your thoughts, Chris, both on the concept of unconnected, but this concept of underconnected, folks that maybe are only using the internet once a week, once a month. How does the digital development team look at this, and what are some of your projects that you are focusing on?
Great. Thanks, Manu. And thanks also to everyone for being here this afternoon. I'm not going to pretend to speak on behalf of all of USAID. There's certainly a lot of stuff going on around the world. I'm not even going to capture the breadth of what our team is doing, though we do deliver a week-long training on digital development for USAID officials around the world. But as a starting point, just for the purposes of this conversation, most of our work is really grounded in the goal of achieving an inclusive digital economy. And not to overstate what is very obvious, that just doesn't happen on its own. It doesn't happen overnight. It means a lot of different things to a lot of people. And though the title of this conversation is Connecting the Next Billion, you've also heard Will tee up and others down the line reinforce that you can't just go with connectivity, nor can you start with the products and services that people are using. What does it take so that the most underserved, the most remote, the poorest of the poor can interact in this digital economy in a way that's going to enhance their livelihoods and meet their wants and needs? So there is a connectivity element. There's an affordability piece. Locally relevant content is hugely important. Digital literacy, digital skills building, the gender gap that exists with respect to mobile phone and internet access and ownership. These are all access pieces that are part of a puzzle. But to go even a little bit further, there's also a huge component to this that's reliant on digital financial services, the mobile money offerings, the e-payment systems, the opportunities to spend, save, transact in a way that drives financial inclusion to those who really haven't had it before. And then a third component that we really focus on is the use of real-time data systems that allow us to collect information in the field, do rich back-end analysis, and then provide that information again in different varieties so that folks on the ground can use it to inform what they're doing, to adapt their efforts if needed, and to impact the lives for those who we really care about. That's the structure. The stake that we've laid in the ground and where we've come in on a team is to say, what we're going to look at is where there are market gaps and or market failures that not enough people are doing things about. Where can we steer public sector resources and align private sector support in areas where the business case doesn't exist or the incentives aren't there for the private sector to go at it alone? We largely do that through public-private partnerships. The Alliance for Affordable Internet is one, and most of the folks here at this table, their organizations are members of that alliance. Another one is the Better Than Cash Alliance that we also created to transition huge payment streams from cash to electronic, noting that there are huge accountability and transparency and efficiency gains to be made, but also the network effects of pushing a lot of money from governments, donors, multinational corporations through mobile money and other e-payments will drive down the cost of those products so that the poorest of the poor can use them. We've been supporting GSMA for a number of years to close the mobile phone gender gap and providing the new business cases and new products for mobile network operators to provide for women and their families. And then two other examples I'll just touch on that are newer in life. One is what is called a mobile hub that we've been working with a number of other bilateral and private donors, including DFID and Gates and Swedish SIDA, to figure out how we address the fragmentation that is in the mobiles for development sector and to work efficiencies into our conversations with mobile network operators, private sector actors on the ground, governments who want to use mobile and digital technologies to meet their socioeconomic objectives in countries. So that's an effort that's coming online that's really looking at how you aggregate demand and how you aggregate approach that lessens the burden that we're seeing from NGOs and implementing partners on the ground. And then finally, another new one that's coming into play is in direct response to the Ebola crisis in the Ebola-affected countries in West Africa, of pulling together public and private sector resources so that we can extend the connectivity and network in those countries and to design data systems that are interoperable and will collect health information where volunteers and health experts on the ground and governments can actually be more effective so that if this crisis happens again, we can provide more support to them, and then putting in place the digital financial services so that health workers and others can get paid on time. We've seen that part of the reason that the Ebola crisis was so huge was this inability to interact and just effectively communicate. So we're working through a partnership for Digital West Africa to address that as well. That's a few examples. Thanks.
So, Madura, in our conversations, I think what's really struck you is just the internet adoption rates and the difference in terms of developed countries at 77% as of 2013 and developing countries still lagging behind at 31%. And Comcast has done a lot on the digital literacy front and ways to try to get that adoption rate up. And I wonder if you could spend a few minutes to kind of talk about your perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Manu, for inviting me, and Comcast and I am delighted to be here. So I, as sort of Manu suggested, I'm going to speak about Comcast's domestic US-based internet adoption program. And I think although, you can never kind of replicate, take things from a developed industrial economy and then take it to a developing country, but I think there are some insights that we could glean from our experience here, especially because some of the low-income neighborhoods that we're working in, there might be some similarities. Obviously, not it could never be a sort of a clear transfer of ideas, but there might be some ideas and insights. So for us at Comcast, our sort of the central adoption effort is built around what's called Internet Essentials. It's a wraparound, multifaceted program, which I think, as Kevin mentioned and everyone else has mentioned, it's the multifaceted nature is the key. And it's targeted at low-income households, families with school-age children who happen to be on the free or the reduced lunch program. So it is open to any of those families across our footprint. And just recently, NAACP actually referred to this program as the nation's largest experiment in reducing the digital divide. And it has been running for just over 4 years now. And as of February 2015, we had connected more than 450,000 families, and that's roughly about 1.8 million low-income Americans. And I'll sort of, before first of all, let me describe what the program is. So it has, as the point about being multifaceted, it's designed to address, and I'll go later on about how it was designed, but it's designed to address the specific drivers of non-adoption that research has consistently found. And so one of them is the low-cost access price. It's a $9.95 price point. That's it. But then those who join the program also have access to a low-cost computer at $149. It's not Comcast is not in the business of selling computers, but we've integrated that into our program because we believe that that's important to touch that driver too. And then the final point is it has a very, very extensive and a full suite of free online, print, and in-person training, not just in digital literacy, but the full spectrum of issues that go into relevance. So we've done that. The digital literacy programs are designed in partnership with local community-based organizations, such as we have a huge partnership with the Khan Academy to drive some of these training modules, and then they're delivered through community-based organizations. We have thousands of local partners who actually deliver these digital literacy programs along with the low-cost access and the low-cost computer. So it's really kind of brings together, we look at it in sort of four angles, and one is that, we have to, it's an innovative approach because we're doing things that we hadn't done before. Number two, it's very rigorous in terms of its sort of analytics and research, which I'll go into later. And it's flexible. We have changed the designs many, many times. And then finally, it's community-based because all of these things are delivered through small and large community-based organizations. So in terms of design, it was designed basically based on the findings of the U.S. National Broadband Plan, which for the first time identified sort of this, through very rigorous research and quantitative methods, the drivers of non-adoption, which are relevance, which is the most important. I think comes in about 40, 50, or just close to 50% cost, and then access to a computer and digital literacy and so on. So we designed this program based on the research that was done by the National Broadband Plan to make sure that we had touched each and every one of those elements. And then what we have done is throughout the program, we have actually gone and done sort of major research projects. So just last year, Dr. John Horrigan, who some of you might know, he's the preeminent researcher in broadband adoption. He used to be the head of research at the National Broadband Plan. He's now at the Pew Research. He, through our Tech R&D Fund, which funds engineering and sort of over-the-horizon innovative research, he was funded by the Comcast Tech R&D Fund to kind of go into the Internet Essentials program and really take a longitudinal look at people who had not adopted broadband, had adopted broadband through Comcast Internet Essentials, and how they, what prompted them to adopt broadband and how they evolved into engaged users. And sort of two findings, and he tells me that it's the first time that a longitudinal study had been done, and the two key findings he found are that to encourage people to adopt broadband, sort of the social relationships, both within their communities, but also the relationships that they have with institutions like schools, government agencies, are a big driver in dealing with the relevance issue. So that's the first point. And then the second point he found, which was really enabled by the longitudinal study, was that he found that those people through Comcast Internet Essentials who had actually taken up the training that was available to everyone, he found in just about every instance double-digit improvement in the way that the internet was used. For example, there was a double-digit percentage point difference between those who had taken up training through Comcast Internet Essentials and those who hadn't, in the extent to which they used to start a business, or the extent to which they used to do online banking, the extent to which they used to apply for a job. So the training piece is not only important to kind of impacting on relevance, but it's actually very important to use John's term for digital engagement, so that the internet is used for its maximum sort of potential. So that's what we do, and basically sort of our guiding principle has been that this is a very complicated and complex problem that is driven by many drivers, and so we need multifaceted solutions. They need to be flexible, and as a company, kind of makes it easier for us because we can change things in different regions, different areas, depending on what we find. And that finally, all of this must be designed and delivered with community-based partners. So we take a very community organizing principle to what we do. And even with that, it's not an easy job. It's a very complicated and tough, and it takes time. But I think what the results are showing and the numbers are showing.
So Cheryl, let me just go back to you. As an IGF MAG member, you were involved in the discussions and the thought that went into picking connecting the next billion as intercessional work for the IGF. Can you provide us more context on what they're hoping for in Brazil?
Sure, thank you. And just for those of you who in the room don't know, I know we use a lot of acronyms. The MAG stands for the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group of the Internet Governance Forum, and it's a group of about 56 people, give or take, men and women from across the world that represent different companies, different governments, different civil society organizations, different fields of academia. And we meet several times a year, and we're actually responsible for helping to coordinate the IGF every year. And there's really a lot that goes into it. For many of you, I see many familiar faces in the room, and there actually are some MAG members in the room as well. But each year we put out a call for workshop proposals, and we select these workshops, which are part of the IGF. We coordinate main sessions. And the major project that we've taken on, and this is something that we have tried to get started for several years now, has been intercessional work. So the idea is to have some work that's ongoing in between each IGF, so that it's not just a one-time event that happens once a year, but there's ongoing work on a lot of these really important issues that we're all talking about here today. And so the theme that we wound up agreeing to within the MAG is policy options for connecting the next billion. And I think, as you heard from what's been an amazing presentation, I think, of what so many different groups and companies and governments are trying to do in terms of addressing the many different issues related to this, we thought this theme was going to be big enough that many people would be able to contribute. It was global in nature. And as part of selecting it, one of the things we looked at was the Tunis agenda, and we really tried to match up with respect to the Tunis agenda key parameters for selecting the theme itself that would be supportive in terms of the IGF's overall global mission, and in terms of being able to produce something in Brazil that will be useful for the many people that come to IGF. They can take home and learn from the different experiences. And so there's a call for open proposals right now. It's on the IGF website, and there's more information on it there. I would encourage everyone to please take a look at it. And the great thing about the IGF is anyone and everyone can participate. And my company, Verizon Communications, we've always really had huge value from this because we're able to learn so much from different governments, from different organizations around the world, things that are important to people, things that our company is doing really well, things that we need to work on. For example, we're really trying to do a lot of work right now with the disability community and other populations that have different types of barriers and challenges to connectivity, because there are the challenges that we all know and talk about with respect to investment, infrastructure, et cetera. But then there are some really unique challenges, and globally among different countries, the challenges are even more unique because every country is different. There are different cultural things to consider, and they're different. The geography is different, et cetera. And so we are hoping in Brazil to really, first of all, we're hoping to receive a lot of inputs. So, and as I said, anyone can produce inputs. We're hoping that you guys will go online and you will participate. Participation is really key. This really is a multi-stakeholder effort, and we really need as many good thoughts and ideas and an understanding of what's worked for people and things that need to be worked on as well. And so this is also coming off of last year's IGF. We launched some best practice sessions, and those were quite successful. The MAG did a really good job in trying to identify some key areas that the community could do some work on. So for one example was online child protection. And that's an area that a lot of different governments and groups and companies have been trying to do good work in and to continue to try to do good work in. And so I'll stop there. I don't know if folks will have questions, but really hope that you guys will just participate.
So on that note, we'll go one more round with our panelists. And here the question is just, what is the one, based on all the work that you do all over the world, if there was a document that was developed by the IGF-USA folks and there's a working group that's looking at this, what is the one recommendation that you would want to see there? Kevin, we'll start with you.
I mean, I think that if there was one thing that would end up making a big difference, it is the idea of making sure that people are having an opportunity to appreciate the underlying value. Whether I talked about it in terms of value, other people talked about relevance or digital engagement. I think that encompasses that group encompasses both affordable access, and that's in smaller packages of data, and it's also it encompasses data that is more slimmed down so they can get access to it and try it. And I think that component is the single biggest thing you could probably do in the short term to make a big stride for one of the groups. The group of people that just they're in extreme poverty, it's very difficult how you're going to find a solution to them. And the ones who are living in extremely remote areas without any access to infrastructure, those have to be a longer term solution. So the group of people that I think you could make the biggest impact with in the shortest amount of time is that group.
I'm sure we would have a nice conversation later about that. I'll challenge you to say that actually, the next billion is very important, and it's really important to bring online. But the real challenge are those who are much farther away from us being able to connect with. And, it was really nice to hear the Undersecretary mentioning our report's results. But one of the findings of our report that is most disturbing, but of course most important, is the fact that very clearly, again, the research is showing that those hardest hit or that are very far from being able to afford and being able to enjoy connectivity are the poor, are women, and are the rural dwellers of the world, especially in the developing countries. And so if anything, I would challenge the IGF and those involved in in the IGF forums and policymakers across the world to think more creatively and innovatively, not just in terms of policy and regulation from a new perspective, thinking about policy and regulation from an incentive perspective and not so much from the traditional way that we've seen over the years, which, yes, it supports or attempts to support progress, but at the same time, for the most part, what we see, especially in many countries where we work, is that the lack of policy and the lack of appropriate regulations is stifling the kind of expansion and the kind of development that we would like to see taking place to facilitate the kind of growth that then would lead to many more options, not just to those next billion, which we see that one way or another might be closely approachable from market or commercially viable solutions, but really focusing on those that commercially viable solutions have not been able to meet the needs. And I think Chris mentioned that. I mean, even the Comcast example very much in the US focuses on those communities, and those are really the citizens of developing countries that we are not only most concerned with, but would like to see more innovative solutions addressing their needs. Simply because it is hardest to reach, it doesn't mean that we cannot do things now. And the proof is that a lot of the actions that many of the A4AI country coalitions are already taking we hope not only to see the impact very soon, but are really showing that when working in this environment that is a multi-stakeholder environment, which is what we do and how we operate when we work through our coalitions, but by bringing the many voices of the different stakeholders into the process of defining and thinking out ways in which policy and regulation can address these issues, many new ideas come to the table. Ideas that many that have been doing this kind of work for a long time had not thought of. So it's very important that the process remains open, remains multi-stakeholder, so new ideas and new innovations come to the table, but most importantly, that those innovations think creatively to address access issues, obviously around affordability as well, but access, adoption, and use issues for those last billions that we are not exactly focusing, but from an A4AI perspective, we see really should be the focus. And so I challenge all of us to think in that way and not just on the next billion.
I think I would focus on the following for a document that you might put forward or a draft or something to talk about, which is building or rebuilding trust. This is something we talk about quite often, and it's something I've seen, and I like to often call this the human trust networks. If you don't have the people on the ground and the people coming in to do the work and that trust between whether it's the internet society or it's A4AI and your partners, you have to have that trust. It's the collaborative security model we're looking at the Internet Society, collaborative sustainable development, collaborative policymaking, and collaborative governance. It all involves partnerships. No one group does it, no group does it alone, but just it's building trust. And some of it's been lost and we have to rebuild it. Some of it we know how to gain, but we do have to think about that as a key thing. And also, we are from developed worlds, and when we do go in to work with partners around the world, there's a different tone, there's a different way, there's a different manner with which you do what you do, and it's to listen, I think. So rebuilding that trust and listening, I would say.
So we've already heard a focus on creativity and innovation, and sort of a focus on sort of understanding where it is we're going, and now trust. And I'm in the position of coming up with something else, because those things are obviously great. I mean, I think the thing that for me would put it all together is sort of this very relentless focus on the users and the people that we're trying to reach, right? Sort of understanding and not thinking at it from them and working back, right? What will make what's needed, how can you get it there, thinking creatively about how you get it there, again, not being stuck in a box, having the trust in the community to actually get there, but this sort of really focusing on the end users. And to do that, you need things beyond sort of talking points and platitudes, right? You need data, and you need to understand the precise nature of the problem, And really, the problem is that you're trying to fix. And I mean, Sonia's exactly right. When we look at the, the last billion, right, we're looking at, a community that's going to be extraordinarily difficult to reach compared to, some of the problems we're talking about now. And so we need to understand what we're doing, not just why we're doing it. I think everyone agrees that this is a noble and laudable goal, but I think we need to understand in a very precise and rigorous way what it is we're doing. And I mean, we've heard sort of about the value of that and the insights that you can get by focusing on understanding your users. In this case, they're not users yet, right? We need to reach them and help them get on this wonderful thing that we're all here to talk about. So.
So I'll build on Will's point, but come at it from a different angle. And to do so, I'm going to turn to Indonesia. Last couple of years, we've been working with the Indonesian government through our Global Broadband Innovations Program to craft and get launched their new national broadband plan that came out last September. And they did a really interesting thing. They did several interesting things there. One, they tied their national broadband plan to a relaunch of their universal service fund. And traditionally, universal service funds have been for extending telecommunications into underserved or remote areas. More recently, they've been expanded to include the delivery of broadband into those same areas. And even more recently, with Indonesia as an example, and a few others to this day, they've gone a step further and said, let's not look at just the supply side of the equation. Let's really look at the demand side so that these users can be a part of these services. And specifically, they said, we know that what really concerns Indonesians and prevents them from interacting online and using these tools are consumer awareness, locally relevant content, and digital literacy, themes you've heard in the past hour. So they tied their universal service funds to the ministries of health and ministries of education, for starters, to say where we're going to look is in communities where these ministries are already involved and are working on activities that have a content play to it, that have an opportunity to build digital literacy into what they're already doing, and really to enhance the role that demand side of the equation really has in this context. So my recommendation there, to the extent that universal service funds are a part of these conversations, is to look more to that side of things. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think, I agree with 100% with everything that's been said. I think my only contribution would be based on our company's experience, is that, to have a real deep appreciation, not so much, it's not even intellectual appreciation, but like a real visceral appreciation that there are no turnkey solutions to solve this problem, and I think, top-down sort of prescriptive solutions or ideas, especially coming from sort of, shall I say, capital cities around the globe, from large institutions, sometimes don't connect with the realities. And so I think, avoiding turnkey solutions and to again touch on what everyone has said, to have wraparound solutions. And it's a word that I came to Comcast from the National Urban League, which is one of the largest direct service providers, and it's a historic civil rights organization in this country. And it's a word that the National Urban League uses to describe what it does. It's wraparound services. I think that's what's needed, and the wrapping that's needed will depend on what communities you're working with, what countries you're in, and so on. So so our view, and from doing this at Comcast, and now it's 4 years now, and it's now an indefinite part of our company. It's something that it's not something that that we have done before. Is that we've learned, and we've grown in humility, I think, as a result of it, because we've learned that when we first started. I can go give examples of how we've changed things based on what we've learned from people on the ground. So I think that avoiding turnkey solutions, avoiding notions that if you do this, then this will happen, is probably a useful thing to have. And also keeping at it. I think focusing on, this is not sort of avoiding the sort of the press release and then let's move on to the next thing. Avoiding that and keeping at it is something that's also useful because and keep at it and change incrementally as you learn. We've stuck to the sort of the education focus on on families with kids on the school lunch program, whether free or reduced, and we've kind of stayed at that so that we learn from this experience. I think sometimes these programs tend to be sort of driven by the press release cycle. I think that's another one to avoid, and that's something that we've tried to do. But I think avoid turnkey solutions and grow in humility and keep at it, I think would be a useful thing.
So we have about 5 minutes for questions, and we do have a visitor here from abroad, Arsene. I don't know if you'd like to try to make an intervention now. This would be the perfect time, and also would welcome others if they have questions to come to one of the mics. But I think we approximately have about 5-6 minutes left. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Arsene Tungali, and I'm a blogger and activist from Democratic Republic of Congo. A few months ago, I received a call from a desperate friend called Ben, who had an issue. He told me he received a message from a stranger asking him $50 to be sent the following day. If not so, he would publicly publish pornographic pictures and video on his Facebook profile. My friend Ben is a public and a religious person, and such a thing is the worst that can happen to his Facebook profile. And as you can imagine, as he didn't send the money, his profile was full of those insane images the following day. This is just an example of issues and of issues I'm dealing with in my daily life back home, helping young people protect their online privacy, educating children on online safety tips and how to respond to such threats. I'm also bringing out their voices to decision-making meetings. So talking about making efforts or creating frameworks to connect the next billion, I think it is important to talk about online security and make an emphasis on developing countries. Online security education has failed in my country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, making the work that I'm doing with no resources extremely important. I would like to share with you 4 levels of education in my country, and I think it's the same for most of African countries. And it is sad to notice that all of them has failed, making things difficult for new internet users, especially children. The first level is the family level, and you will notice that this level has failed. Online security education has failed because our parents are not digitally literate. The second level where we gain education, in my country, for instance, we receive education from church. And the problem there as well is those church leaders don't consider talking about internet issues in church services because they think this is not important. The third way we learn in my country is through school. And the problem is there is nothing in our educational program that is related to online security or internet or information and communication technologies, which makes things more harder to those students who finish school with no knowledge about how they can deal with internet issues. And so the last way of learning is what we call the street learning. And you can imagine there is where you receive the worst of education because everyone will tell you their own ways. There is nothing that is accurate and there is nothing that can help young people be safe while they are accessing their online services. I wanted to share this with you so that whenever you plan activities or whenever you plan projects to develop in African countries like my country, please think of those 4 ways of doing. Thank you.
obviously, as we're trying to end up finding ways to connect the next billion or the last, whichever it is we're focused on, we have to find ways to address the safety concerns like you've raised. Facebook has an active community standards program, which would be in violation of, and we work with local communities to make sure that they're reflective of local community standards and their values too. But obviously that involves, increase both the digital literacy and safety. But that has to be a component of what we do.
This is it's Garland McCoy with Technology Education Institute. I just wanted to throw something out that I hope everybody would find of value. But I think as we, since we've in effect harvested the low-hanging fruit, and we now really are challenged by whether it's again the unserved or the underserved, that we might, and also given the fact that the internet as an ecosystem has really matured now to a critical infrastructure, we might consider, and again, this is said with a lot of love to everyone here over 10 plus years of working in this, that we look at some fresh faces, some fresh company partners in this. This is no longer just us here, the ICTs. We look at trading companies, finance companies. We look at other partners that that realize the critical aspects of the internet for their business. They're GE or their hospitality company or UPS or whatever, HDL. And so having them as partners with us, having some fresh troops, fresh perspectives, as we start drilling down into this very hard final, low-hanging fruit that we need to work on, that might be something that we consider adding to our ranks. So I just throw that out there for consideration as well. Thanks.
If I could, actually, that's a great point. The research project that I mentioned that Dr. John Horrigan did, and one of the big findings actually was that these sort of non-tech communications media type institutions, like especially the banks and government agencies, that he found that those people who had sort of interactions or who had some kind of input from those non-tech communications companies through training and other things. I know there's several banks that do that here in the U.S. Actually did end up having a sort of a much easier on-ramp onto the internet. And one of the recommendations was that these other folks also take an active role in, especially on the literacy front, because a lot of the times that people come into contact, a lot of the companies that people come into contact through online are not tech and communications companies, and that would be a good thing to do. And that they would bring different perspectives than that we would.
Just a quick point to answer some of the things that you mentioned. We at A4AI, through the work that we do with our coalitions in countries, one of the exercises that we've done that has been really useful and an eye-opener to everyone, and including all the stakeholders in the country, is an exercise in trying to define what is the web people want in the specific country. A4AI, we are hosted, our secretariat sits within the Web Foundation, and our colleagues have a project that is called the Web We Want campaign. And in defining that, what you realize is that you allow people to envision ways in not only about how they want to have access, but how they want to use, how do they want to enjoy, how do they want to benefit from access to the web. And that has allowed some very interesting ways of thinking about actually policy and including regulation and other legal instruments to address issues around privacy and security, but even on issues of access as well, because the realities of how people interact with technology, interact with the web, interact with information are very different, even within one country. So I didn't mention the countries that we are talking about. I hope you'll be curious enough to go to our website and check all the work that we're doing in many different countries, including our research that is trying to uncover a lot of these nuances. But in Nigeria, a country that we are working very closely with many stakeholders and have a very active national coalition, it's similar to the US in that they have a federal system with many different states. And I can tell you that in every single state in Nigeria, we see completely different realities when it comes not only to access and infrastructure and the kinds of issues that we're talking about earlier, but even the kinds of things that you were talking about. How do people learn? How do people interact with knowledge? How do people interact with information? Is very different. And it is, very important to us to have these multi-stakeholder process, because it's critical to inform us on how we can then integrate all of their voices and their concerns. And it's not easy. It's not an easy process to go about, because even within the countries, there are many different voices that dominate the dialogue. But one of the wonderful things about an open multi-stakeholder approach through a coalition as the ones that we have in the countries is that a lot more of those voices are now coming out. And we are creating a platform where they not only are coming out, but they also are louder, and they becoming much more influential in the recommendations at the policy level that are made than they've ever been before. And I'm certainly proud of that, but we have to work very hard to make sure that those are included.
So just want to conclude with, how gratified we were to see the level of interest in this panel, and so grateful that we have representatives from some of the America's best telecom companies, internet companies, and representatives outside of industry here, really excited about sharing their knowledge and helping the IGF-USA really kind of try to deliver a concrete policy option. So thanks to everybody for joining this panel, and I think it was a really worthwhile discussion. So thanks.